For those of you that celebrate Christmas, we hope that everything went well. We all know what Christmas means in modern times. For some people, Christmas is about celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ. For others, it's about giving. For others, it's about family or simply rest. And for many people, it's all of that combined. But one particular person, the President of the United States of America, Mr. Donald Trump, his Christmas ideas were something totally different, because his Christmas day came with what he described as a different kind of gift, which are airstrikes against the ISIS targets in Nigeria, a group he claimed was terrorizing Christians and has been doing so for quite a long time now. So on Christmas Day itself, the United States carried out airstrikes in Sokoto State in the northwest of Nigeria, targeting what it said were camps linked to the ISIS. So we've got strikes that were carried out with the knowledge and cooperation of the Nigerian government. So we've got two powerful governments here. So we've got the United States of America on the one hand, and then we've got the Nigerian government on the other hand, all working together using joint intelligence to see whether they can actually resolve this ISIS crisis in the north of Nigeria. However, despite having this joint intelligence, there are reports that things did not go well, because almost immediately there were cracks in the story. So we saw that the Nigeria's foreign minister, pushed back on the idea of Christianity being protected. He made it very clear that this was not just about protecting one faith. He said the operation was meant to protect all Nigerians, Christians, Muslims, and everyone. So this is something that I think has raised a lot more questions than answers. And if you pause for a minute and let that sink in, it does not make sense at all. Because what we have here is that we've got two governments, we've got the same strike, we've got two very different explanations. And so the question becomes very simple. Which version matches what people on the ground actually experience? Because what people experience on the ground apparently is something totally different, and is actually caught the people on the ground unawares that this was actually coming. So on the surface, this looks very familiar. You've got a powerful country like the United States of America using military force against a group it considers dangerous. But the story becomes even more important when we ask something deeper. Now the question a lot of people are asking is, why was the strike explained in that particular way? Why was it framed in such a manner that this was about Christians, whereas the government itself is saying this is not about Christians? And now if you go further and dig deeper, other people are now asking what parts of the reality were left out of that explanation. And I think this is what has raised a lot of frustration for a lot of people that are trying to understand what has actually happened in Nigeria. So the United States described this operation as a clean counterterrorism strike. That was the first thing that we saw from the president, Mr. Donald Trump. And the language was very simple. ISIS targets were hit. Civilians, especially Christians, were being protected. So that explanation circulated mainly through the United States platforms and the United States media, that this was about protecting the Christians. But people living in those affected areas told a completely different story. Completely different story. So in Jabo village, which was hit by debris from the strike, residents said that they were familiar with bandits. You've got bandits, yes, within that particular group. You've got criminal gangs. And these are not obvious ISIS camp operating openly. So you've got other sorts of activities happening other than just the terrorist activities. And others within the villages say that the violence they live with comes from people like kidnappers. You've got the local armed groups, you've got criminal networks, and not a clearly defined foreign terrorist organization such as the ISIS. Now, hearing all those stories that are coming from Jabo village, which are contradicting the actual intent of the airstrikes, it makes you wonder, so does this mean that the United States and the Nigerian intelligence was wrong? Not necessarily, because, what is clear is the fact that there was a gap between how the strike was explained by Trump and his team and how insecurity is actually experienced locally. Obviously, there's a disparity between what happened on the ground and what the joint intelligence actually said was a threat on the ground. And I think that gap is what matters. And I think this is the gap that a lot of people are asking. This is the gap that a lot of people are thinking has raised a lot of questions rather than answers. So it's very clear that in parts of northern Nigeria, violence doesn't come from one single group with one clear name. It often looks like this. Obviously you've got armed bandits, you've got people kidnapping for money, you could have criminal groups controlling roads, villages, you could have fighters moving across the borders from the Sahel region, you could have all sorts of things. You could have local conflicts over land, cattle, and just all sorts of things. And some of these threats could overlap, and these threats can change names, can merge and split. So when an external power labels a strike simply as ISIS, it may sound clear to those that are watching from a distance, particularly people that are watching from far away or even on television. But it's even more confusing and even unbelievable to those living there, because they know that they face all these violence almost every day, particularly from the local bandits. So this is not about denying security threats, but it's about how those threats are described by the people that are investigating some of these issues. So if you look at the way Professor P.L.O. Lumumba puts it, he puts it so well.
That you are dealing with an organization which is out of control, which is engaged in unconventional warfare, and is not going to be easy to defeat them, because they are not your regular army wearing army uniform. They are not arranged and organized in battalions and brigades. They could be somebody who is walking in the street and propagating their agenda. They hit when you don't expect, and they hit what you don't expect. Even when you say you are going to bomb them, who are you going to bomb? Where? In which location are they crowded that you'll bomb them and finish?
So when a powerful country explains violence in simple terms, a lot of things can happen. The first one is usually the local trust within the people weakens, because people now begin to question whether these decisions are being made with a real understanding of their lives, or is this just about the two governments that are involved? Is this just about Nigeria or the United States of America? And secondly, I think it's the pressure that falls on the local government, because now we've seen the Nigerian leaders then have to answer these uncomfortable questions about who is defining the threat, because as it stands, it's not even clear who is in control of the situation, whether it's the United States of America, whether it's the Nigerian government. We've got the Nigerian foreign minister saying one thing, we've got Donald Trump saying another thing, and the intelligence that seems to be in shambles, and this is a $1 million operation, and then you wonder what everyone is trying to achieve in all of this. And then the third one that I think, which is also the most important one, you look at the regional suspicion also grows, because other African nations are probably watching and asking questions. If this can happen, if this can happen to our neighbor, Nigeria, if this can happen within Africa, could it happen to us? So let's be clear here. This is not the first time that the United States has provided military intervention in Africa. The United States has long used military force overseas, including Africa and other parts of the world, where they've driven out terrorist groups, and this has actually worked. I think in this case, what we've seen is that the intelligence was actually shambles in the first place. And also what is important is how openly the action was framed, and how little space was left for local complexity, because there's clearly people being attacked on a day-to-day basis, and there's no distinction between who might be the ISIS terrorist groups and who might be the bandits. And I think if both parties, the United States and Nigeria, had allowed more time for this local complexity, this would have been an issue that was going to be fought with precision, and it was going to be fought effectively. Because we all know that military force can disrupt armed groups. It has worked in so many parts of Africa. It has worked in other parts of the continent, where this has reduced the growth of the terrorists, and it's disarmed people effectively. So looking at it, what can Africa learn? What are the lessons that Africa can learn out of this? Because I think this story is not just about an airstrike. I think it's about how powerful governments describe violence, how local people experience that kind of violence, and what happens when those two things don't line up. And this is exactly what we've seen with the Nigeria, United States sort of intelligence. It's been a botched intelligence, and it's made things worse rather than resolve issues here. So as much as Africa is taking notes, I think what is clear is that Nigeria's quick statement of cooperation without strong public safeguards signaled to Washington that pressure works. So obviously they gave in to the United States without carrying out proper investigations, because if the Nigerian government are the ones that gave the go-ahead, it means they must have been satisfied that the intelligence was solid on the ground But that was not the case. So they just went with it, and it put its own people on the line, putting its own people at risk. And this is something that is not forgivable, because as a government, you are obligated to protect your own people. And I'm sure a lot of Nigerians must feel let down by its own leaders. So some African leaders have warned about this before. We've got people like Julius Malema that argued for stronger parliamentary oversight of foreign military operations. They've argued for better intelligence sharing within Africa and long-term unity, politically, militarily, and economically. This man has always argued, and he does make a lot of sense, that why can Africa have one military, one currency, and one leader, which makes a lot of sense. I know we're probably far away to achieving some of these things, but this concept makes a lot of sense, because what Mr. Malema argues is that if this was an intervention by the African people, for the African people, to help the Africans themselves, there will be no foreign meddling or any suspicion of any kind. And I think at this point, it's very difficult to tell what the real intentions of the United States of America are, because obviously now everyone is suspicious about what they're currently doing, even though sometimes the United States may mean well, they may want to do things the right way, but because of the way things are done, will always be suspicion. I think one thing to understand is that in geopolitics, actions matter. Having a unified African preparation determines whether trust survives or whether planes keep returning. So I think there's a very big lesson for Africans to learn out of this. And I think if Africans don't learn and pick up from what is currently happening, I think the same thing will keep repeating on the African soil. So if you want to share your thoughts, please do so in the comment section. And if this is your first time, my name is Nsiku Banda. This is war we are reclaiming, and we'll see you in the next video. Ciao.